Matt Taibbi is an award-winning journalist, an investigative journalist at Racket.News. He's the author of Hate, Inc., of I Can't Breathe, many other best-selling books. And it looks to me, one never knows when they travel and release big episodes of podcasts, but it looks to me like he just returned from at least a trip to Florida or Maine, where he sat down for an hour and a half with Tucker Carlson. Was that Florida? Was that Maine? It was in a barn, and it wasn't Zoom.
Yeah. Although the weather was Maine-like, I would say. It was cold even down there.
Well, when we get the full studio build out, which is in progress here in Dallas, Texas, Matt, we'll hopefully be able to fly you down at some point. You can hang out with us on this show and the new 4 o'clock.
Are you going to have a competing man cave, basically?
I don't think I'm going to get to go full on man cave, but I'll get to put some personality. Somewhere between my fake background, your red background, and Tucker's full on man cave. We'll strike some kind of middle ground. It was a fascinating conversation you had, Matt, with Tucker. You guys talked a lot about accountability. What's going to be revealed over the next, I hope, not just a couple of years, but maybe the next couple of months? What's happened? Even during the first presidency of Donald Trump, but certainly during Joe Biden's term. What's happened? What's been covered up? What lies have been told? What crimes, quite honestly, committed by people in the United States government? But I want to maybe kind of force this false sports-like frame on you, Matt, but you've probably thought about it. Here you're starting a new 4-year period with Donald Trump as the president. And as we go forward, what do you think are the top 3 stories you're interested, as an investigative journalist, in paying attention to and investigating?
I mean, I think number one for me is just who was president when Joe Biden was incapacitated. What were the mechanics of the last presidency? Who was making decisions? Who was signing documents? Was it bifurcated? What were there people in charge of foreign policy and then other people in charge of domestic policy? Clearly, I don't think he was really the president in a traditional sense. And I think that has to be investigated. Although of all the things that Tucker and I discussed, that's the one thing that there is not a formal probe already underway toward, unless you might call that part of the intelligence community probe, which I don't think you can. So that, for me, I think is the outstanding mystery of the last, 8-year period, is how did they pull that off? And then how was he moved off his own ticket? It's a substantial question.
Yeah, so let's stick with number one here for a minute. I would actually think, Matt, you could have the most optimism that you will get answers to that question, because it may not need to be part of, a congressional, senatorial, or intelligence agency investigation. This is the one story that I would think you might be able to give some credibility to the mainstream media in expressing curiosity. Because there was such a fallout on the left, because he was pushed out, because there's not unity, you'll have, songbirds. You'll have people talking to your traditional outlets, the New York Times, whatever it may be. And as the Democratic Party moves forward into whoever it comes next, they won't be tethered to protecting the legacy of Joe Biden. So I think you might have some real optimism grounded in reality that you could get an answer to that question. I think you might. I think there could be stories, and it might not even take you, Matt. This could be the kind of thing that they actually write about in the New York Times.
I think it's possible for sure. I mean, you saw right after the election, there was an episode of Pod Save America, which is sort of like, where you go if you're a Democratic Party operative and you want to begin a messaging campaign. And right after the election, a bunch of the people who were staffers for the Harris campaign got on and issued a whole bunch of revelations, things that had not been made public previously. They said that there was never at any time a poll internally that showed that Harris was in the lead, which I thought was striking, given that we were publicly told something quite different for months on end. But that's the kind of thing where, yes, once the dust settles a little bit, you will get insiders coming out. You will get people who have access to grind, who are upset about decisions made by superiors, people who are moved out of positions they were promised. and they will start talking to reporters, and hopefully, as you say, the age-old curiosity kicks in, and somebody at these big newspapers like the Times or the Washington Post decides to actually commit resources to that story. It's shocking to me that they haven't already done it, but you're right. I think it could organically happen.
But they haven't yet, except in those small instances that you just pointed out. I mean, you have sources. If this is the number one curiosity for you, if that's the number one story, I have to ask: do you have any sense of it? Do you know the answer to your own question? Who was running the White House?
Well, I asked around to the extent that I have any sources at all, and there aren't many. They're all third and fourth hand at this point. We know roughly who was in charge of the day-to-day business of the White House under Joe Biden. The central figure for the first couple of years in the Biden White House was Ron Klain, who was the chief of staff of that White House. So he was the person who was kind of the intermediary between Joe Biden and everybody else. So he was, his wingman at every meeting. He was sitting next to him at every national security, confab. But you can't really draw too many conclusions from that. If you look at the reporting of people like Cy Hirsch, who's somebody I've known over in the past, he did a story suggesting that Biden was essentially forced out by a group of people who were loyal to Barack Obama. That there was basically a threat that the 25th Amendment was going to be evoked, and that it was that caused him to change his mind. Because remember, 7 days before he dropped out of the race, he was adamant that he was going to stay in, and something changed his mind. So what happened there? I think that's kind of the second question, is how did that whole maneuver work out? In another country, we would call that a coup. Here, for some reason, we just called it a change of mind.
Yeah, that move is just totally swept under the rug in terms of the meaning of it, the implication of it. It's just like, oh yeah, well, he couldn't. You, by the way, the defenders of democracy who see around every corner a threat to democracy, totally undemocratically replaced one candidate with another. And yeah, it's business as usual. You brought up a name, Barack Obama. The other name I always think about, though, is Nancy Pelosi.
Right, and this is she was the figure whose name got leaked out very prominently in the key period between July 13th and July 21st of last summer. There were a number of news stories that leaked out that suggested that Nancy Pelosi had called Joe Biden, and maybe along with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, the three of them may have approached Biden. There is a story that suggested that she put Biden's longtime aide, Mike Donilon, on the telephone and had Donilon essentially read him out the riot act about what the reality was with the poll situation. I don't believe that story. The idea that Joe Biden would be told negative news about polls for the first time and say, oh yeah, you're right, I'm going to drop out, that doesn't really scan for me. But you're right. She figures prominently in most of the kind of official versions of what happened. But still, it's not sufficient to explain to the American people how an American president is removed from his own ticket, particularly after a primary process that was itself undemocratic. Most of those, or a lot of those primaries were one candidate slate elections where there were no competitors. Competitors were forced off the ticket. People like Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. RFK, of course, was sort of bullied off the ticket early on. These are important questions to work out, I think.
I'm going to pursue our little framework of the top three stories that you want to pay attention to over the next 4 years, but I'm also going to indulge these tangents. Because you brought up RFK, I do want to ask what you think is the probability or the possibility of him getting confirmed. That starts tomorrow, his hearings. So I read in the Financial Times this morning, Matt, that he's probably going to lose. This is not for sure, right? This is speculation, but he's probably going to lose the 3 votes that were lost by Hegseth. So Collins, Murkowski, and McConnell. But then there's a whole host of other Republican senators. Langford is hugely pro-choice. And then Tillis, I believe, is directly connected or heavily invested in or receiving support from the pharmaceutical industry. There's other senators whose names aren't at the tip of my tongue who are also heavily supported by the agricultural industry. So when I hear all that, Matt, I'm just like, just trying to play the chess of this, I don't know how he gets to 50.
I think they will have to call in a lot of markers, but my understanding is that he does have the votes. Now that's just a rumor, but that's kind of the word within the Trump community, is that they feel pretty good about his chances. Tulsi Gabbard is another story. I think there's a little bit of pessimism about whether or not she's going to get through. The ex-intelligence officials are putting on a pretty hardcore full court press to try to prevent her from getting the DNI job. But you look at RFK, you think about all the different lobbying interests that will throw everything they have at preventing somebody like that from getting into becoming the secretary of the HHS. It's extraordinary, right? And the only thing that you can imagine is that there have to be huge reassurances given by the Trump administration to all these Republican senators who might be on the fence that they're going to get what they want about other things. There's got to be a lot of horse trading going on right now.
So to your point, I think the betting markets reflect what you just shared with us, the sentiment within Trump world. I don't care about betting markets. I always tell people, I have to tell my friends this. Betting markets are a picture of your current present tense reality. They have no ability to look into the future. Hegseth was at 10%, but that didn't tell you what events could change or how reality could be shaped in those ensuing months. So your 10% meant that's where you were today. But RFK is at 80%. So you would have to think, to your point, exactly, if he's going to pick up those Republican senators that are tied to ag and tied to pharmaceutical industry, there must be being promises made, in which case you're like, okay, then has RFK been neutered? Has he been defanged going into HHS?
I haven't heard that yet either. And that's one of the kind of big mysteries about how to cover Donald Trump. Is he going to live up to all those promises? Yes, he's going to put all these people in office who, frankly, just the fact that he chose these folks is extraordinary to begin with. You think about somebody like Gabbard. Gabbard just 6 months ago was in the middle of a fairly major controversy about being put on a terror watch list by the TSA, and ends up as the nominated to head the DNI. We have another person, Kennedy and Jay Bhattacharya. These are both heavily censored figures who are now, going through these nomination processes. So it would be a huge reversal for them to actually get into office. But at what cost, right? Like, are they going to get in and then not be able to do a whole lot? The American government it's the mother of all super tankers. It doesn't change easily, but they're certainly making an effort to do new things and to take big swings of the axe at this thing. I think it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, by the way, that's going to be the nature of a conversation I have coming up a little bit later here today on the Will Cain Show. This maximalist approach by Trump, doesn't mean he gets everything, but I think it means he gets more, and Jonathan Turley, law professor at, I think he's at George Washington, has said that. He's like, if he gets half of the executive orders that he's put in, that's like a massive change in American governance. He may not get birthright citizenship. He may not get half of these, but if he does get the other half, you're just talking about a massive turn of the supertanker. And I think it's the same thing. And I'm not debating with myself. I'm just saying, like, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is head of HHS, even if he has some handcuffs on him because of deals made with senators who are tied to certain industries, is still a massive change from who you might alternatively have at HHS.
Absolutely. I mean, I think as we've seen, all of the different health agencies have essentially become proxies for, corporate health services, right? Whether it's insurance or the pharmaceutical industry, private equity companies that own hospital groups. They've given so much money to both parties over the years that it's become very, very difficult to really make significant change any significant change in policy. Really, they've advanced kind of slowly, and decisions are made as a collective over periods of years or decades. Now they want to come in and just sort of drastically do new things. That would be really, really interesting if that happened. But they might go back to some other things that aren't so great. I mean, my understanding is that they're thinking about rolling back, negotiating for Medicare prices for the government, bulk pharmaceutical deals. It took a while to get to there, but other things might come in their place, which would be great.
Okay, if I asked you for a second story, you gave me Joe Biden and who was running the White House over the past 4 years. If I gave you a second story that you're really focused on investigating, what would it be?
Well, this is a little bit more because I'm personally invested in the question, and I spent years on this issue. But the free speech and ending federal censorship executive order mandates a sweeping review of the entire federal government and orders that a report be delivered about every federal agency that was involved in activities that might be contrary to the spirit of the First Amendment, essentially. Now, when I worked on the Twitter file story, which was, the internal files at Twitter that Elon Musk released, we saw just in a little corner of a few documents that there was a fairly enormous kind of informal bureaucracy that had been built, where agencies like the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Director of National Intelligence were constantly in contact with these big internet platforms and building a kind of an informal censorship system modeled after the formal one that is now in place in Europe called the Digital Services Act. And I'm fascinated to see how far along they went towards getting there. I think we only saw a little tiny bit of that. My guess is that they were aiming quite high, and that a lot of those programs are still in place and need to be extracted, because that was a huge question, because it gets into all sorts of things like, what kinds of things are we seeing not only on the news or on social media, but are there changes in AI decisions, right? Like when you call up searches on Google, what are you seeing? What are you not seeing? Probably there are content massaging efforts that have been built into kind of the American government bureaucracy at many levels that that are going to be fascinating to uncover.
That one I'm less optimistic on, and I'm curious what you think about this. I'm less optimistic on it, Matt, because, and you wrote about this, like, I think this was an article up you have at Racket.News where you said, how do you cover the Trump administration? Because standing there with Donald Trump at the inauguration was all of these guys. Sundar Pichai, YouTube censorship, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook,
Tim Cook.
Jeff Bezos, Amazon, on and on. So I don't know. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It means on that one, that's going to take a lot of work from you, because it seems like those guys are in the family now, so I don't know how much, the Trump administration appetite will be to aim their missiles at those guys now.
Well, we saw beginning in August, Mark Zuckerberg was really one of the first of those CEOs who had been, heavily involved in these backdoor censorship efforts. He was really the first one to jump ship and send a public letter and say, aside from Elon, obviously, right? But he issued a letter saying that he had been pressured to censor. He used the word censor, which I think was important. And essentially what his message was we're under a lot of pressure to comply with these increasingly draconian laws that exist all around the world. Europe has become an extremely difficult market for all of these American companies, and we can't push back against any of that if we're getting the same thing under the table from the United States government. We need the U.S. government to stand behind us and push back against laws like, the Online Harms Act in the UK or the Digital Services Act in Europe. So the most optimistic read of what that was at the inauguration was Google, Facebook, Apple, and all these companies hoping that they can count on the Trump administration to stand behind them if they decide to defy some of these orders. Like you, I'm less optimistic.
Or I would think,
Yeah.
I would think, Matt, or they don't like it. They don't like the government manipulation of their content. They did it for 4 years in order to protect their liability, indemnity and so forth. So the question is like, okay, going forward, we'd rather not operate under this type of coercion. So what we're willing to do is sing. Like, are they canaries on the previous government officials that pressured them so much? So Trump and his DOJ or whoever it is that does the investigations, like, okay, we're not going to go after the social media companies because they were really under the coercion of the government. And here are the bad guys behind the scenes within the government.
If that's the case, that's a beautiful thing. And again, there are already the structures to do that kind of investigation and to take down their depositions if they want to give them. It's already basically in place. The executive order mandates the investigation. There is a Senate committee that is raring to go to staff up. Basically, Rand Paul's committee, I think, would be very pleased to do a wide-ranging probe into the entire censorship regime. They've already issued a whole bunch of subpoenas about COVID origins, but I think that's another issue that they're willing to take on. This is the Homeland Security and Government Oversight Committee. So there's going to be a big investigation into the censorship business if those folks are willing to talk, and Zuckerberg already has in a limited way, not only verbally, but he's also turned over quite a lot of material to the House in the last couple of years. But the other companies haven't. That's what we really need to see. YouTube, and obviously related companies like Google, Wikipedia, other firms. We need to find out what their communications were. It's not enough to have the Twitter files and basically a handful of documents from Facebook. I think we need a much bigger array of stuff to get a handle on what was going on.
And it's not in the past, right? It's not over. All those same tech companies today are exerting some type of censorship over content. YouTube, even Facebook. Like, I don't think it's unfettered free speech right now on any of those platforms.
Not even close. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right.
And it's gotten worse over the years, too. Even simple things like using search engines, it's so obvious what they want you to read about almost any topic now. And this is why I think a lot of the people, and Mark Andreessen talked about this in the Joe Rogan show, this was one of the alarming things for a lot of the guys who or these CEOs in Silicon Valley, is when they found out that the government basically wanted to do the same thing with emerging AI technologies that they had done with social media content. The thing with that is that now you wouldn't even need to have Twitter files back and forth or emails back and forth from the White House to Facebook, please take this down ASAP. With AI, you can just tell it some general ideas. We would like you to stress this and de-emphasize that, and presto, it's done. So
right.
That's why it's so scary. Like, have they already implemented kind of AI-based algorithmic censorship? If that's the case, then it's going to be very, very difficult to unwind that, and a huge technical problem.
But I'm curious where you are on this. I want to move to your third story in just a second. So I'm kind of focused on this DeepSeek story. I can't profess expertise whatsoever, right? But the Chinese AI platform that is reportedly, we don't know what's true and what's not, but reportedly doing really advanced AI processing at 1/20th of the cost with like 1/10 of the chips, something like that. They built DeepSeek for like $6 million, and they have to build these other AI large language models for like $100 million. And it takes, Grok, Elon's one, like, I don't know, let's call it 20,000 chips. And it took, DeepSeek like 2,000 chips. The point is they just got better, cheaper, faster. But what that means is what Silicon Valley was selling to everybody was AI is going to be dominated by the existing players because they're the only ones with the infrastructure to be able to do this, right? The money it takes. So, OpenAI and Microsoft and Google, they were going to be the winners. They were saying that we will be the winners because no one else can afford to win. And so we need to do this. And that's what's thrown this whole thing into the chaos. Is it shouldn't be, but it's a surprise. Oh, guess what? Another guy in a garage just totally disrupted you. Facebook in a garage to MySpace and, on and on and on. It's the story of tech. And it just happened when it comes to AI. My point of saying that entire story, if it's true that that's what DeepSeek did, well, then anybody trying to monopolize AI and control the way it does output and therefore our minds has to deal with the guy in the garage. That's actually good for free speech. Maybe not DeepSeek in particular because of China, but if people can do this, that's good for free speech.
I hope so. I mean, certainly that technology will make it easier to detect, what they're doing, why they're, what the emphasis is, what the narratives are. I mean, I think that's one of the good things about AI. I've actually even used some of my own AI programs to try to figure out what the companies are doing or what they're up ranking and down ranking. But yeah, I'm still scared of it. I think there's we already saw that these companies turned over 98% of their content management operations to algorithms. And if you can fully mechanize that process through AI, even if it's a lousy AI, that's a little disturbing. So yeah. I hope that's not what they're planning on doing. And again, a number of them have claimed that they revolted and gave all their money to Trump because they were worried about the presentation that they heard from the Biden administration last April on this subject. So again, how do we read the presence of all those people at the inauguration? Are they there because they're going to be implementing a different government/AI program, or is it going to be sort of less aggressive? What's the deal exactly? I don't know that we're going to find out. I hope we will.
Okay, I want to ask you quickly your third story you're going to focus on. You already covered a couple of things I wanted to talk about, including how you cover the Trump administration. But one of the things you talked in depth with Tucker is about the opportunity here for accountability, specifically when it comes to some very high-ranking people like John Brennan, James Clapper, Leon Panetta, and so forth. The intelligence agency apparatus that we know, for example, lied about Hunter Biden's laptop has now had their security clearances revoked. That's interesting to me. I'm curious, though, would that be your number three, or do you have another story you're really focused on here over the next 4 years?
Absolutely, it is. Trump's weaponization of government order, executive order, mandates two different sweeping reviews of the intelligence community. One that would be headed up by the Attorney General, another one that would be headed up by the DNI, who again theoretically is Tulsi Gabbard, who has been a primary focus of some of those people that you mentioned, particularly John Brennan. So there are going to be highly motivated people looking at these actors like Brennan, Clapper, Mike Morrell, John McLaughlin, all the people who are on that 51 spies list. The letter that was saying that the Hunter Biden laptop story was had the earmarks of a Russian information operation or whatever. But there's so much stuff that they're going to be able to look at, from the origins of the Russiagate story to mass surveillance to the illegal use of leaks of signal intelligence to create fake news stories. I mean, there's to censorship, frankly. It intersects with that as well. So I think, there's an opportunity here to do something like a second church committee, which happened in 1975 when Idaho Senator Frank Church basically to help America out of its post-Watergate funk, decided to air all the dirty laundry, or a lot of the dirty laundry, of the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. And a lot of those programs, by the way, were very similar to the stuff that we're talking about now. It was about censorship, it was mass surveillance, fake news stories that were put into the public. And the public was shocked, and it led to kind of a period of reform, after which there was less political investigation and snooping, and I hope that's what we get.
Really quickly on that one, Matt, are you hopeful on that? You just said it would be under the direction and the motivation, therefore, of, you said the AG, right? So Pam Bondi.
The AG and
then
DNI, but also in
DNI.
conjunction with Congress. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so do you feel optimistic? I mean, this is why, in part, there's going to be a lot of resistance to Tulsi. There's other reasons, but that's in part. Do you feel optimistic about all of them? Like, it's all going to come back to Trump and his desire to do it. That's just the way it is under Trump. But that there is some, and by the way, he will be motivated because they all investigated him, and planted fake stories about him. He was the target.
That's why normally when you talk about probes of the intelligence community, it's like, okay, at best they're going to give us one thing and it'll be for show. In this case, you had the entire intelligence community sort of working for a period of 8 years to crawl up the backside of a sitting president, an angry sitting president, who has nominated people who were specifically put there to kind of enact payback on those folks. I mean, it's very conspicuous that he nominated both Tulsi and Kash Patel, who's another big decision this week. If he gets that job at the FBI, if Tulsi gets the DNI job, that's going to have a heavy impact on these investigations. But I've already heard that there is already sort of unprecedented cooperation going on between congressional investigators and agencies like the CIA and Homeland Security, where they already have the leadership in place. Then the other actors, we're going to find out. But if the pattern holds, we're going to, at the very minimum, we're going to be getting a whole lot of documents about things that should be fascinating, which is interesting to me.
Matt,
I don't know.
I know you're not.
That might not be enough for you, but I don't know.
Oh, I think it's enough for me. That's pretty interesting. And the thing about you, Matt, is you're not a partisan. You're not on the right. You are historically on the left. And I think I don't even feel comfortable using those terms anymore. I really don't. I don't think they accurately describe any of us, nor the debate in our public sphere anymore. I don't think the bipolar spectrum is useful. But there will be times when you'll have to cover this administration, and you will, for things that you think are worthy to be investigated of. And I want to keep talking to you. And clearly as well, you're going to be looking at the stuff that this administration actually exposes about the last 8 years. And so Racket.news is going to be a place you have to keep up with because, yeah, I share your passion for that last one, especially. All of them. And then I would throw in JFK as well. And MLK, and everything else.
All that stuff's fascinating. How has no presidential candidate thought of this before? The public wants to know all this stuff. Why not just give it to them? And what this tells you is that these forces are so powerful that we couldn't even release information that's sort of basic to know for the American public. It's amazing to me. It's just from a spectator's point of view to see all this happening. So I'm really interested, and whichever way it goes, it's going to be fascinating to cover, I think. And I'm glad we're going to be able to talk about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's going to be covering it at Racket.news. So make sure you go over there and check it out. Matt, thanks so much for giving me so much time today. Good to see you, man.
Thanks, Will. Take care.